All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast, and I'm happy to welcome back friend of the show, Charlie Sykes, author of the To the Contrary Substack. Charlie Sykes, great to see you.
It's great to be back with you, Matt.
A lot to talk about, but we should probably start off. I want to delve into this story in The Guardian, and we've obviously seen grumblings about Joe Biden percolating, but there's this Jake Tapper book about to come out. And in The Guardian, the story starts this way, Charlie. I'm going to clean it up. Joe Biden totally effed us by leaving it too late to drop out of the 2024 U.S. presidential election. A former top campaign aide said, aide to Kamala Harris has told the authors of a new book. This thing goes on, and there are a lot of F words. What did you make of this, Charlie Sykes?
Oh, it is going to be very, very, very messy. It's interesting that Joe Biden and Jill started the pre-buttal to this book last week. Very, very unusual, but it was an indication that they knew that this book and other books were going to be coming out, and they were obviously concerned about it. I have two completely contradictory thoughts about this, Matt. Number one, this is the last thing the Democrats need to have this kind of nasty civil war breaking out right now. All attention should be focused on Donald Trump, right? So this is really not something they want. On the other hand, and here's my contradictory opinion, at some point, this is the kind of autopsy and introspection that they desperately need. You know, if Donald Trump is an existential threat to the country, they need to really ask the question, okay, how did we fuck up so badly that he became president again? And how do we not do it again? Did we create a bubble, an echo chamber where we didn't see what everybody else saw until it was too late? So very messy. It's going to be very, very ugly. My listeners, your listeners are not really going to want to talk about this. But at some point, this is a huge story. And we all have to, look, you and I have been doing this for a very, very long time. You actually wrote your book before I wrote How the Right Lost Its Mind. And so I constantly have to ask myself, how come I didn't see this? How come I ignored this? Why did I not listen to those warnings? And I think it's one of the lessons that we've learned that I think everybody in politics needs to think about, how not to drop into a bubble that makes you blind to something that is going to be incredibly consequential, like the fact, I'm sorry, that Joe Biden was too old and should not have been running for re-election.
Now, I just perused this story in The Guardian, and obviously it's not unique to think that Joe Biden should have gotten out sooner, that he sort of sandbagged Kamala Harris. Was there anything that you found in this piece to be, I mean, other than the colorful language, which I think really illustrates the point, that is new or that we should be aware of?
Well, I think they're going to be dropping a lot of new nuggets, and I have not had a chance to go through the entire article. I think what struck me is the level of anger that clearly is bubbling up there, the anger of the Kamala Harris team. Last week, when Biden went on The View, it certainly seemed as if he was throwing Kamala Harris under the bus, suggesting that he would have won and that he wasn't surprised she lost. Now, look, the delusion is a huge political disease and not uncommon, but Joe Biden was not going to win that election. And the fact that he's going around telling people, I would have won that election. So there's a lot of anger on the Kamala Harris team. And there's obviously still a lot of bitterness in Biden world about him being pushed out, and how that plays out. I don't know, Matt. I mean,
he might really believe
ugly.
it, right? I mean, he very well could be delusional. And I think it's probably, if you're a world-class politician, you probably need to believe that you're going to win, even if everyone else knows you're not. So he may, I don't think he's necessarily lying, but I think it is delusional, as you said. But look, so let's just unpack this quickly. And I agree that, Charlie, this is probably ratings death. You get Charlie Sykes on your podcast, you want to boost the numbers, and here we are, making the fans mad. But let's just unpack a little bit where the Democrats were. Like, I feel like kind of the fundamental problem was that Joe Biden was the only guy who could have won in 2020, and nothing really changed between 2020 and 2024. Like, he picks Kamala Harris, and so I think that he sort of picked what I think was a flawed um, successor. Now, look, to her credit, I think Kamala ran a really good race in 2024,
Yeah, I
but
do too.
wasn't just the fundamental problem that the Democratic Party didn't have anybody waiting in the wings to sort of be his successor.
This is a remarkable thing. Leaving aside the whole progressive versus moderate issue, the the aging out of the Democratic Party also meant that you kind of lost a generation. They didn't have a bench. I mean, you think about the Democratic Party that over the last 20, 30, 40 years, how did they get to the point where they didn't have a bench stocked with successors in waiting? You would think that a party as dynamic as the Democrats once were would have governors, would have senators, would have people who in fact could step up. And this was the problem. And I remember that even if you were very concerned about Joe Biden's condition, it's like, there is no plan B. There was a deep consensus that Kamala Harris was not going to be an effective candidate. I actually believe that. I agree with you. I think she overperformed as a candidate, but I was a big skeptic. But then you looked around and go, okay, well, who else? And there were governors out there, but they weren't quite ready. And this is the problem of having a party dominated by people who are in their 80s. It means that, the normal transition of people, moving up and being groomed for power is stopped. And so essentially they put a brake on an entire generation of Democrats who could have been there. Now, again, things have changed now, and there's a big fight now brewing between the olds and the youngs in the Democratic Party, and that's probably going to be pretty ugly too.
Yeah. Well, I think some of these Democrats probably disqualified themselves at a moment when it seemed like the world was moving toward wokeism and progressivism. And then others might have been actually vanquished by the Tea Party, even by Barack Obama pushing through Obamacare, which,
True.
if you're a Democrat, you could argue that was a worthy, noble thing. But there were a lot of Democrats who were kind of sacrificed, I think, probably in the effort to do that. But for whatever reason, and have you seen this now, Charlie? I found this interesting. All these Democrats are now growing beards to apparently seem more masculine. It seems too much to be coincidental.
I hadn't noticed that, but that's really an interesting point. But this is part of the problem is like, okay, how do we, appeal to our fellow young people? How do we look more masculine and everything? And there is a sort of desperate performative nature to it, right? But fine, at least they're trying. At least they're trying to do this. I'm not sure that that's actually going to be sufficient.
Yeah.
I mean, Ted Cruz was growing a beard, and he's still Ted Cruz. What can I say?
Fair point. Okay, let's give the people what they want. The Qatar plane gift, which by my lights, I mean, there are at least three major problems with it, right? There's a security problem, which is obvious, should be obvious. There's the bribery emoluments problem, which again should be obvious. And then there's the fact that Qatar are funders of Hamas, and that seems weird and should be a deal breaker as well. But where do you come down on this? What's the worst part of this whole thing?
Okay, see, what you've done though is by putting those three together, you see how it's a parade of horribles, right? It is. And it's easily understandable. And I am intrigued to watch how many the MAGA folks, the MAGA simps, who would normally go along with everything, are going, this is really a skeevy deal. I mean, you have your Laura Loomers who, let's leave her aside for the moment. Even Ben Shapiro is calling this a skeevy deal. I saw Kevin McCarthy was saying, it's just kind of a bad look that you're doing this sort of thing. But again, this is kind of Donald Trump is at a FU stage of life where he feels that I am absolutely untouchable. I'm not just immune. I mean, I can do absolutely anything, and I am going to milk this sucker in every way possible. So the crypto scam should have been an indication that he and his family were prepared to basically loot the joint. I mean, they were going to stuff everything into their pocket possibly. But I'm not sure that people understood the crypto thing. The plane is just more tangible. right? I mean, you can see it, you look at it. And the fact that he comes out, gets this $400 million palace in the sky, literally the week after he's lecturing Americans that you don't need more than $2 or 5 pencils. It was a bad look on every single level. But I mean, all the things that you mentioned, I think, defy common sense. The security problem of, having this, floating whatever, given to you by a foreign power, the obvious bribe. Everybody knows it's a bribe, right? I mean, there's no question it's a bribe. The Qataris have been bribing everybody they can. They have been paying off everything that moves. They clearly want to buy the president of the United States. The president is clearly for sale. And then the fact that, hey, and by the way, they're also the chief funder for Hamas and other terrorist groups.
Yeah.
It's like you couldn't do a script for a movie that would be more absurd than this story. Yeah, it is insane.
And this last part, I mean, look, we know that Trump, enriches himself on the presidency. That's not a surprise. Right. But I want to ask you about the Hamas thing, right? Because right now we are like ICE agents masked are going and detaining students who wrote arguably pro Hamas, Palestinian things. And yet Trump is taking a plane from people who are funding those efforts, which is hard to understand. Trump right now is in the Middle East doing this tour, but he's not meeting with Netanyahu in Israel. So do you see Trump moving away or sending a signal to Israel? Or is this just, hey, I'm open for business. Whoever wants to give me something, bring it on?
I don't know. I think that anytime you try to come up with some sort of, grand scheme of, Trump's plans, you're probably making it up. But it is rather striking, isn't it, that he kind of blindsides Israel? Because let's face it, the other Arab countries are bigger bidders. They're offering him more stuff, right? There are more golf courses. There are more luxury hotels. There are planes. Somebody's going to give him a super yacht. I'm just saying this. I told this to Chris Cillizza yesterday. I'm just thinking, who's it going to be? Is it going to be UAE? Is it going to be the Saudis? And it's going to be bigger than Jeff Bezos's a super yacht. So I don't know, but you make a great point here. The cognitive dissonance. We are rounding up students who wrote op-eds in favor of Hamas at the same time that the president, whose entire brand is I am strong and I am anti-terrorist, is accepting this massive, beyond the dreams of avarice airplane from the bankers for Hamas. And, how the synapses fire. And by the way, there's one other detail that we didn't get to on all this in terms of how skeevy it is. He gets a green light about the legality of this clearly unconstitutional, clearly
Bondi,
illegal
right?
bribe. From Pam Bondi, his attorney general, who until recently was being paid $115,000 a month as a registered foreign agent for the government of, wait for it, Qatar. It's just
unbelievable. Unbelievable. But I do wonder about Israel, right? Because, we just got the last American hostage
Big deal.
out of Gaza. Trump has been negotiating deals without, including Israel in the deals, sort of like he tried to negotiate Ukraine, the end of the Russia-Ukraine war without Ukraine's involvement. So I wonder if you were one of those, and I'm very pro-Israel. I think you are too, Charlie. But if that's your issue and you're a Trump voter, I wonder if you're getting a little nervous right now.
I actually don't understand it enough to be honest with you. I mean, obviously that's complicated. He has wrapped himself around Israel, and he's wrapped himself around Netanyahu, or rather, Netanyahu's wrapped himself around Trump. So it is kind of an interesting diss. What has Netanyahu not done that Trump wants? What did Trump ask him to do that he didn't do? I just don't know. But clearly, it's almost as if there's this bright, shiny object. When he needed Israel to get elected, and to show that he was good for Israel. He was 100% in there. But now there are these bright, shiny objects over here that the Saudis and the Qataris are dangling in front of him, and he appears to be completely distracted. Like, Benjamin, I'll get back to you later. So, I guess to your point that he's far more interested in these deals, which may enrich himself, than he is in the geopolitical issues that are going on right now. In fact, I don't know if you read it this way, and I don't even know if it's correct read. It's almost as if he's also lost interest in the whole tariff war, that he says now it's up to Scott Bessent. Okay, so since I completely fucked up, I thought the trade war was going to be, but the trade war turned out not to be as easy as I thought it was. I fucked it up. I took on Adam Smith and I lost, as the Wall Street Journal says. And now it's like, okay, I'm moving on to something else. Scott, you clean it up. And so who knows what goes on in the when on the ferret wheel of his mind.
But I mean, this is the fundamental problem with picking a politician who lacks character, loyalty to a cause, or like an ideological commitment. I don't think that Ted Cruz would have betrayed Israel, because I think, say what you will about Ted Cruz, and he's pretty much an idiot, but I think he has like a deep, probably spiritual and also ideological commitment to Israel. And Donald Trump, I don't think he has that same commitment to anything really, other than his own advancement.
And the irony is, and you know this as well as anyone, we knew this back in 2015 and 2016. Do not elect someone as president who has no principles or no character. How many times have you and I said that over the last, Matt, 10 years? And so none of this should come as a surprise. And so it is always interesting. Every day you pick up. I know. I can't either. And yet every day you pick something up and go, why? Ben Shapiro is like, geez, who knew that Donald Trump was engaging in these skeevy, unethical deals? Like, Ben, you used to understand this. We warned you over and over and over again. Nothing about this should be surprising to anyone.
Well, Ben, look, I think Ben was, there's this very crude old joke from the South about if rape is inevitable, you might as well lay back, And I think that's where Ben came down politically. Like, I think it was against Trump, but at some point he perceived that, like, there's nothing I can't fight off Trump. Let's just make the best of it. Maybe that's a less crude analogy.
Well, I think that's a lot of the story of how the right lost its mind. It was that, and you know what this is, that if you break with Trump, you are excommunicated, right? You are cast into outer darkness. You have no relevance. You're not at the table anymore. And a lot of them figured, okay, if I want to be in this world, got to take a deep breath, and I'm going to have to swallow all of this. I'm going to have to go along with this. And so you've had the transactionalists, you have the true believers, and then you have the people who go, look, this is the price of admission. This is what I have to do. And you watch like these scenes from the cabinet meetings with the North Korean, portrayals.
Yes.
These are grown-ass people, grown-ass men and women, some of whom actually have accomplishments in life. Not many of them. A lot of them are just Fox News hosts. But going around saying, you are the greatest, you are, and they toe-sucking and everything. And you have to ask yourself, do you have any pride, any self-respect left at all? But basically, in their heads, they're going, including Marco Rubio, saying, this is what I have to do. This is what I have to accept. I have to say these things. I have to kneel in this particular way in order to do whatever I think is what I want to do. And that story's been repeated over and over and over and over again. Right?
What I always find interesting, and apparently, I'm Gen X. Apparently, Gen X is very Trumpy. I find it weird because I feel like everything in my life, every bit of like pop culture, whether it was grunge music or movies, Chuck Klosterman has a whole book about the 90s. And basically the ethos of the 90s was don't sell out. Like selling out is, we were apparently the last
Right.
generation that viewed selling out as like the fundamental sin, and this goes
Mm-hmm.
back before Gen X. Obviously, you see the movie The Doors, where Jim Morrison refuses to change light, girl, you couldn't get much higher. That was like our
Mm-hmm.
fundamental principle. And so like really every like almost moral lesson from pop culture that I got my whole life was like, don't sell out, don't kiss somebody's ass, don't be a
Mm-hmm.
phony.
Yeah.
Like being a phony is the worst thing you could be. And all these people are doing it, and then to my astonishment, everyone just goes along with it. Like they should be pariahs, but I guess more generations see things differently, or whatever.
Or the rewards are, just irresistible to many of them. There's Washington is awash in cash for people who play certain games, right? And people go, okay, I might have to, dine out on shit sandwiches for a few years, but then, the rest of my life I'll be taken care of or something, or the excitement. I've actually wondered about this. I don't know if you have, Matt. Okay, I say I'm an only child from the Midwest, so
Only child too.
which I think is a big asset. I think it's a big thing, but I read the stories of the people who were Trump skeptics, and then Trump calls them on the phone, and he says, "Hey, I would like to fly you down to Mar-a-Lago, this weekend. I would like to fly you on Air Force One, and we'll have dinner at Mar-a-Lago with Melania and everything, and I will listen to your ideas." And there's a seductive power. There's a
Yes.
seductive element to power, and the number of people that have fallen into that, who have their heads turned by that. In fact, I remember reading many, many, many years ago, this will date me, John Dean's book. He was the whistleblower against Richard Nixon. And he was explaining how you get sucked into all of this, how he's on an airplane, and Air Force officers come on and say, before anybody gets off, Mr. John Dean, and how important it was. And then to be flying on Air Force One, or, the Marine Helicopter One, this heady, almost psychosexual sense of power and prestige, and how powerful that would be to an entire generation of people. Donald Trump, I think, has the reptilian instinct to know how to play that and how to work it. I mean, when you get Bill Maher in for dinner and you charm him, and he comes out and says, well, he may be trashing the Constitution, but he's very, very gracious and charming, and he listened to me and all that stuff. I say, all right, so I keep wondering what would have happened. Would I have been me? Because no, I have the deep, my deep sort of assholery that I wouldn't have. But I get it. I understand how it works with some people. I'm not defending it, but at least I can recognize it. Do you know what I mean?
I do. There, but for the grace of God go I. And I should be clear as well. I think you probably have the same thing, Charlie. There's a whole bunch of values and principles that drive my opposition to Trump, including like my parents and church and just traditional values. But the one that I was specifically talking about here is like not selling out. And
I know.
That was really ingrained in me.
Me too.
Probably not
Absolutely.
so much from my parents or church, but from pop culture.
Oh, absolutely. And in my life, I remember one of the hardest days of my life when, I was a magazine editor, and the owner came in and said, I want you to kill this article. And, it would have been easy for me to say, well, yeah, okay, what do I care? I like being editor of this magazine and everything. And I actually sat there and I thought, what would my father do? What would my father think if I sold out, if I gave up? And he had died 2 years ago, 2 years before that. And I remember thinking, this is not who I am. I am not selling out. I'm not going to give up. I mean, this is like, okay, I would keep the job, but my sense of myself would have been different. So I basically said, no, I'm not killing it. And he said, well, then you're fired. I did not enjoy being fired. Anyone who's had it, it is not fun. It is not an enjoyable thing. It was a real turning point. But I look back on that and I go, you know what? When I'm 99 years old and I'm lying in my deathbed and I look back on like the choices I made that were right, not selling out was a big thing. I do wonder how maybe they just don't even think this way. this notion that when you look back on your life and you think about the choices you made, are you proud of those choices? Or I mean, will you regret those choices? I'm watching some of these people go through this process of selling out, and I'm not even sure they even think in those terms anymore. What do you think?
Probably not. I read years ago Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, or whatever, leaders, people. And one of his things is called begin with the end in mind. And basically, think of what you want your eulogy to be and then live your life backwards. And as David Brooks talks about, it's different than your resume. There are resume values and then there's eulogy values. I just went, my wife's grandfather, who was a month shy of 103, just passed away last month. And we just went to his memorial service.
103. Wow.
Man, the stats that guy put up, including like 24 grandkids and all this stuff, and just having a church full of people saying, testifying to how he changed their lives. I mean, and I'm thinking like I'm way more in the world's eyes Googleable, let's say, than Inslee Hicks. You know what I mean? But man, I got a long way to go before I have reached his
and
obituary
none
level.
of that stuff actually matters. No, it's interesting that you mentioned those books. The book that influenced me was Viktor Frankl's The Meaning of Life,
which Covey talks a lot about in his book as well. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that was where the first time I got that notion of think about, what you're going to think about your life when you're on your deathbed. Very, very powerful to me, and I also think that it is important. And again, I think this is something as you get older, you begin to think about what actually matters. There's that time when you think that your job and your career and your income are the most important things. And it's only later that you realize, no, those are the resume values that you mentioned. It's how will you be remembered in your eulogy? Who will be there? And the fact is, we spend a lot of our lives, maybe currying favor with people who, frankly, are not going to be there, and you won't even remember their names. I'm sorry, we've kind of gone far afield, but I do wonder about these.
I like this, Charlie. This is deep, and this is good stuff.
Well, and because there was a moment. Do you remember when somebody asked Bill Barr? There's a name that people are going to forget. The Attorney General in the first term. Aren't you concerned about your legacy? And he said something. I think it was Bill Barr, or maybe it was Rudy Gill, or was somebody in that world. And they said, "Aren't you concerned about your legacy?" And he said, "No, I'm not really, because I'll be dead." And I thought, wow. That's interesting. That's a different philosophy, that I don't care about my legacy or how I will be remembered.
I think a concern about your legacy is a healthy incentive for good behavior. I mean, think of all the rich people who, the Pulitzer Prize,
right?
Or just foundations, libraries. They wanted posterity to remember them and their name, and so the fact that we have a lot of folks now who say, like, in the long run, we're all dead. Well, that's not good for humanity, whether they're right or not. It's not good. It's not good.
Well, and I do think that, you mentioned that we have these billionaires, who are competing with one another and who can build the biggest penis rocket, who could have the more, flex their muscles. We're, part of the age we're living through is all of these man children who are having midlife crises, when in fact, and it's worth reminding ourselves that the rich used to be very concerned about legacies. They used to build libraries. They used to fund, symphonies and ballets, as opposed to what you're seeing right now.
Is there an Elon Musk children's cancer wing anywhere? Maybe there is. I don't know.
Will there ever be?
I don't know.
He could stock it with his own children probably at some point. But it did occur to me. We had the Gilded Age that we all remember, but we are now in a really an age of grift. You think about just the self-dealing, self-serving, the arrogance of the powerful and the famous. We are in a very gaudy period of time, and it is almost as if the other oligarchs have looked at Donald Trump and thought, you know what, he's like opened the door that we can be rich, we can be powerful, and we can be as big assholes as we want to be. And there's something in this that I'm not sure we've gotten our heads around all of this, the era that we're living in, the frauds and the scams. And for you and I, it feels like 10 minutes ago that conservatives were defining themselves as the group that says that character matters, values matter. Bill Bennett writing the Book of Virtues.
Right.
Well, apparently he was still standing at the roulette wheel or something.
Charlie. Man, we could just have a couple drinks and keep this going. Let me go back to give the people what they want. You mentioned Laura Loomer about an hour ago.
Yeah.
I'm loving this, but you mentioned Laura Loomer. I'm finding this fascinating that she is sort of a voice of reason. She has publicly criticized Pam Bondi, publicly criticized Casey Means. This is the Surgeon General nominee or appointee or whoever who prays to trees and worships whatever. And Laura Loomer has criticized this Qatari plane deal. What is going on in MAGA world?
Okay, where do we unpack this? Because it is as if we're living in we're watching. They put the snakes and the scorpions in the bag, and they're kind of shaking it up, and they're eating each other up. Laura Loomer is one of the craziest, most bigoted conspiracy theories. I mean, she's a nut job on fire. I wrote about her before the election.
Marjorie Taylor Greene thinks she's crazy.
Okay, see, that's the interesting thing. Okay, so we are living in a universe where the craziest people are saying the other crazy people are also crazy. Marjorie Taylor Greene thinks Laura Loomer is crazy. And by the way, she's right about that. It was stunning that Donald Trump was listening to her. Donald Trump is continuing to listen to her, despite the fact that she is, I mean, by any normal standard of behavior, is a nut job. She was the one who, she claimed she got a scalp by getting Mike Walls fired as national security advisor. She actually has real influence in this administration. And yet there are other people who are also utterly, egregiously unqualified and nuts. And so you do have that moment where you go, wait, is Laura Loomer right about this? Laura Loomer saying it's crazy that you should be accepting, planes from jihadists? Is Laura Loomer right when she says this Casey Means woman should not be allowed anywhere near the Surgeon General's office? This is not a sign, though, that Laura Loomer is the voice of reason. It is a sign that reason has checked out and not left a forwarding address. I mean, this is part of the problem. I said this the other day, I think it was to Tom Nichols, that the folks who produced Idiocracy should sue this timeline for plagiarism. That we are beyond any kind of parody of just pure insanity. But Laura
I wonder
Loomer,
if this infighting is the result of turf battles. Like, I want to be Trump's crazy girl down south. Or if there are actual, like, cleavages or schisms that are rational. Like I think Steve Bannon, for example, has an ethos. I think, for better or worse, Steve Bannon does have a worldview that was at odds with, like, Elon Musk, for example.
Right. No, I mean, there are some. I mean, on trade, for example, you are seeing some fundamental differences on this. But what Donald Trump has done, and I actually think he kind of likes this. Think of this, as back in the imperial court where the emperor sits above and likes the fact that everybody is fighting with one another for their proximity to the throne. And when to your point about this, which happens when you elect a president who has no character and no principles, then in fact it's all about fear and favor. It's like, who can suck up, who can be close, who can have his ear last, who can whisper in his ear. And if somebody else is whispering in his ear, then they are your rival and your enemy. So it's more like the court of the Borgias or the imperial court of Nero than it is anything that we think of in terms of Lincoln's cabinet, the cabinet of rivals and something like that. No, it's more.
And I
like
wonder how much
who
of it's like,
who is closer.
like a niche, right? So, like for example, Matt Lewis doesn't care if MSNBC hires Jen Psaki because she's a female Democrat, but if they hire Tim Miller, oh, now we're in the same space or something. Former conservatives, very good looking, younger middle-aged guys. I'm joking. Maybe it's just the fact that like Loomer and MTG see each other as like occupying the same niche within Trump world, and that aggression will not stand, man.
That was really a bizarre analogy you just made there, though. I mean, my mind backward reels. So MTG and Laura Loomer is like Matt Lewis and Tim Miller. I mean, where are we going here?
I think that's exactly what I said. Yes.
Okay, so you have some issues you need to work out here, which I'm not going to get into.
No, look, I think that people who occupy a similar niche
I understand what you're saying. I'm just
no, but ironically more likely to hate each other than if you're
there's
totally
only room for one.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, if the locus of power is one fat old man sitting in a chair, then the space is limited, right? Then it's not like there are a lot of different ways of influencing. There's only room for one crazy voice in the room at a time necessarily. So actually this is an insight, I think. Because it's like how if somebody else is filling up that space, and Marjorie Taylor Greene thought, I'm the crazy Southern conspiracy theorist, and suddenly there's somebody else that's coming in that's vying for it. You can tell that Nancy Mace. Okay, I'm sorry, I was right. Nancy Mace obviously also feels that rivalry, but she also reminds me that there's something going on, and I'm not joking about this. People's brains are melting during this period. Have you noticed how many people's brains have been broken? Where people
Nancy Mace, she's been on.
She was ever saying,
Well, there was a minute there where Nancy Mace was going to be like the sane conservative, serious, standing up against the crazy, and then she got the memo.
5 minutes,
lane. Yes, I could have that lane to myself, but let Kathy McMorris Rogers enjoy that lane, because that lane is going to retirement. That lane is not going to Mar-a-Lago.
No, that's right. But so, I mean, I do think you have a point there about the lanes, and with Trump though, it is interesting that he likes surrounding himself with people who are smaller than him. That it is interesting how, when you think about the craziness of the personnel of Trump 2.0 versus 1.0, he actually had some substantial people in Trump 1.0. I mean, in retrospect, I was not praising him at the time, but, guys like Rex Tillerson or, Jim Mattis or, other people, these were grown-up men, John Kelly, who brought life experience and had credentials. And when they left government service, they would go back to something wonderful, right? Trump now in Trump 2.0 wants people who have really nothing other than his favor. They would be nothing without him. And if he flicked them off, he could do so without losing anything whatsoever. You put a Pete Hegseth in as Secretary of Defense because he is so expendable, right? You put a Sean Duffy, and oh my God, I got to say my anxiety level about travel is rising because I know Sean Duffy. I'm from Wisconsin. The guy is dumber than a box of rocks, and the fact that he is in charge of air travel, this scares the living shit out of me. I'm just telling you, if you know the guy, it will not enhance. But Donald Trump has surrounded himself with these geeks and these again, expendable incompetence for a reason, because it means that he really is that center of that universe, and they are all completely dependent on his favor. So yeah, the rivalry between them is almost inevitable, as it is in any sort of, medieval royal court.
All right, I'll get you out of here on this one, which I think's a transition. So Ed Martin got nixed as was it like U.S. Attorney of Washington D.C. or
U.S. Attorney D.C. Yeah.
And now it's Jeanine Pirro, Judge Jeanine. And was this, I think, the 23rd or something, Fox News star.
Yeah.
And it strikes me as so interesting. And as other people have observed, it's not superfluous or extraneous. Like, being a TV personality is actually part of the job. Like, that's Trump wants people who are going to be able to communicate. But it's such a weird, other administrations have obviously done a little bit of this, but this is like, wow, this is dequalification.
Well, that's an insight into Donald Trump's mind, that his whole mind is what he sees on TV. And if you can communicate on TV. On the other hand, there's something particular about that appointment. So Ed Martin was so beyond the pale. I mean, he was too much for a United States Senate that was willing to confirm, Kash Patel and Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, he was that bad. But Trump's reaction was, and I'm sorry to keep going back to using the word that you didn't want to use at the beginning, but this seems like such an obvious fuck you to everybody. Like, okay, I don't get Ed Martin. I'm going to give you Jeanine Pirro. It's almost as if they sat around like, who would trigger the libs the most? Who would be the most, just obscenely inappropriate appointment that I could make here? And it would be Jeanine Pirro. So it did feel like a big FU from for, you think that you can get rid of my worst appointments? If one of them goes, I will give you somebody you hate even more, somebody who's even worse than that.
I disagree. I think that Ed Martin was like so bad that everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Oh, Judge Jeanine's going to be drunk all the time, so she won't be able to do the damage that this is other people, of course.
Well, I don't know. It's like, I mean, maybe, that was if there was a strategy, which I doubt, the whole Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. I mean, do you remember where you were when you first heard that? I mean, do you remember that moment you go, no? And I'm guessing you had the same reaction that we all had, even though we had been warning, is like, no, this cannot be real. This cannot be Matt Gaetz. And there was that relief when Matt Gaetz went wherever he went. And everybody went, oh my God, Pam Bondi. Well,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Judge Jeanine is our Pam Bondi.
And how has that worked out for us? Really?
Probably better than Matt Gaetz. Can we be honest for a second here?
No. See, I'm not willing to go. See, it is this race to lower our standards. Like, okay, it could have been worse.
Downward.
See, that's it. Daniel Patrick Moynihan is spinning in his grave because he thought, when I said defining deviancy down here, I didn't think it would be this bad. I did not think it would go this far, this fast.
Oh, man. I got to half of my notes, but that's okay. Charlie Sykes, obviously read his newsletter, To the Contrary, on Substack.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Charlie Sykes, man, thanks for coming back and having a deep conversation with me.
Hey, anytime, Matt, anytime. Thank you.